Welcome to GCA Unmuted, the podcast where we share the stories and strategies that show how Georgia Cyber Academy makes online learning work. Before a student ever receives special education services, something important has to happen first. They have to be noticed, understood, and given the chance to get the support they need. That work begins with Child Find and the protections of IDEA, even in a virtual school. I'm joined today by Veronica Williams, GCA's Assistant Director of Special Education Compliance, and Martell Shavers, Assistant Director of Special Education Instruction. Together, they oversee how students are identified, evaluated, and supported from the first concern all the way to what happens in the classroom. So thanks again, Veronica and Martell, for being here. But first off, can one of you share a story that you think really shows why Child Find and IDEA matter for students and families?
Yeah, I can start. So, just thinking about my time in the classroom and having a student who seemed to be frustrated with school in general, just feeling like they weren't understood, feeling like they couldn't get the material, feeling like something was wrong with them because they weren't able to keep up with their peers. And so, being able to then bring that to the concern at the time of one, talking with the parent, and then two, talking with the special education staff and our assistant principal at the time about my concerns and about my conversation with the parent, and then being able to get that student the support that they needed, and then seeing them shine in class after receiving that, understanding that there wasn't necessarily something wrong with them, but that they were learning differently, or that they needed additional support in order to grasp the concepts that they may not have been able to get as easily as some of their peers. And so being able to see that kind of barrier removed for a child and watching them flourish is why I do this work.
Mm. No, that's so good. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Martell, before we move on?
Honestly, Halton, I think that's a great answer. I don't want any add any
Mhm.
blemishes to that. That. I mean, that's the perfect reason for a child finding IDEA is finding that student that may be classified as unmotivated or behind or anything like that, and identifying that child and making sure that they're receiving the supports that they need. So that's a great
Mm.
story, Brian.
No, that's so good. That's a great springboard here, making sure that we're supporting the students, and we can't do that. We can't support them unless we identify them. So that's great, Veronica. But before we get too far into it, for listeners that may not be familiar, can one of you explain, or really both of you, if you like, but what is Child Find and how does it work at GCA?
Yeah, I can start that. So essentially, child find is a process by which a child is um, one either identified or either there are some concerns that are brought to the attention of a teacher, or even a parent can also what we call do direct parent referral, saying that hey, I think that my child may have a disability, and so they want to have their child evaluated. And so that can come from, like I said, a parent. It can also come from a staff member. And so once that identification happens, that's one way. But also, if a student transfers into our school district, being able to, they've been identified in a previous LEA, which is a local education agency, and they've been identified previously, making sure that they continue to receive those services, or noticing that sometimes folks don't like to share that information. And so we may notice that there's something a little different with how the student is performing. And so also kind of bringing that to the attention of a teacher, or usually it's a school leader, that hey, we have some concerns. And so starting that process and identifying that, we also do send out a letter as well to let our stakeholders know, hey, if you have a child or know someone who may have maybe a student with disability, to let us know. And there's a form that you can fill out. And so we have staff members who then follow up with that.
Mm.
The process then starts with our MTSS staff, which is our multi-tiered system of support staff, and they kind of have that initial conversation with our families to see if they would like to, one, start through getting some intervention. So there's steps prior to special education kind of like a tiered process, 1, 2, 3. So they go through those tiers first, and if those supports don't work, or if a parent simply requests testing, then we do testing for that student to see if they qualify for special education.
Mm. That's so that's so good, and I'm glad you mentioned the MTSS. And if people want more detail about the MTSS, we actually did another unmuted episode with the MTSS, so I don't want to make you go into too much detail with that. How do y'all think IDEA then guides the way that students are identified? Because you just mapped out, like child find and how we actually do that in the process with GCA. But how do you then think that IDEA guides the way that students are identified, but also supported in our virtual school?
I'll take that one.
Mhm.
Um, so with IDEA, being that it is special education law, um, I would say students aren't privy to that until they reach that, special education eligibility. However, once they do reach that eligibility, IDEA guides pretty much everything from drafting an IEP, the supports, the accommodations that's in that IEP, that leading to an instruction that's given in the classroom, that specially designed instruction that's given in the classroom. IDEA essentially guides and molds everything from instruction to compliance as it relates to any student or any individual with, special education.
Mm. And so, can you map out, Martell or Veronica or both of you? Can you guys map out then what does that process look like from, as you said, IDA like maps out and kind of like sets the tone. It's this law of like how the students are either identified or the services they support, those sorts of things. So, can you tell us from the moment that a student or a family first has a concern to that actual receiving of services?
Yeah. Um, So first and foremost, when dealing with special education, your best friend is going to be data. Data drives every decision that we make when it comes to special education. So that may be classroom performance. It could be assessment data, as Veronica mentioned earlier, parental feedback. You know, teacher input is very, very key, being that those teachers are working with those students every day. And then here, we also, progress monitoring. So that's just checking on the process of that student throughout. Um, so yeah, once you have that entire, conglomerate, I would say, um, it starts with a referral. We have to gain, consent from the parent because, we can't do anything without parental consent.
Mhm.
So once we gain that consent, conduct an evaluation, a comprehensive evaluation, and then it kind of just goes from there. If that student is deemed eligible for special education, then we ensure that we provide those supports and services to ensure that that student is successful. So kind of starts from data from
Mhm.
a manifold or multitude of people. And then we go through the process of a comprehensive evaluation, and then we ensure that we provide those services and supports.
Mm.
And if I can add to, in addition to that process, so sometimes a parent may already be having concerns and may receive some type of diagnosis on that student. And so
Mm.
also informing the school, hey, I received this diagnosis and we think this may impact how our student is going to be receiving their education. And so that may trigger this as well.
Mm. No, that makes sense because that's what I was going to ask is, have y'all found that is it a is it usually a parent approaching the school and saying, "Hey, I think that my student needs to be tested or might need extra support," or have you found that it's more often the teachers approaching parents saying, "Hey, we think that we might your student might benefit from," like which one have you found, or is it really 50-50, or is it if
It's
that
kind
question?
of It's kind of 50-50. I would
Yeah.
say we have a good amount of parents, especially here at GCA. We have a lot of parent referrals, but also where you may
Mhm.
see a teacher referring is usually there's behavior.
Mm.
There's something that's popping up that's saying it's not usually a random teacher or a random stakeholder because in the IDA, anyone who has a concern can say that they have a concern and then it's looked
Mm.
into. But generally, you either get it from a parent or a teacher who's noticing that behavior has changed in a child.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
I'll agree with Veronica on that. It's it's 50-50 here. However, if there is a teacher that has a concern, um, we always keep the family in the loop. Want
Mm.
to make sure that they're always a part of that conversation on the forefront as opposed to being an afterthought. So,
Sure.
um, 50-50, but we all work in collaboration when it comes to our teachers and our parents.
Mm. No, that's so good. Do do y'all think too, is there like a timeline that's typical on this process? Is there something in IDEA that says like you have to get this process done, like you have to make a decision within like 6 months or 3 months or a year? Like, is there anything from a timeline of like, okay, this student we think we have identified to boom, they required services, or is it not that stringent or strict?
Yeah. I can answer that part. So when it comes to actually being, once we have that consent to evaluate, so that means we've had a discussion about a student. So I say that to say a lot of the law says a reasonable time. And
Mm.
so that kind of has been defined by case law. But for example, if a student is showing signs of needing additional support and they're in that tiered process, they have to go through that tiered process first. And there's data that's collected. There's usually a 6 to 8 week timeline between those discussions. And if those interventions are working, then they continue on that path. If those interventions aren't working, then they move to more intensive intervention and then get to special education. So that doesn't have a serious timeline, but where the timeline does come into play is once we have identified that we may have a student with a disability and that parent signs consent to evaluate that student, then there's a 60-day timeline that kicks into play.
Mm.
And then once that 60-day timeline has told, then we come together. The data should be back from testing, given parents don't delay, because generally it's also a scheduling and trying to get the student scheduled for those tests. But generally a 60-day timeline to do that. And then within 30 days from that, we try to have the IEP implemented.
Mm. Mm. Veronica, to follow up on that, how do you, what is happening behind the scenes then to make sure like everything's done correctly and everything's done on time, right? Because you're the compliance person. So it's like, how are you like, what's going on behind the scenes to be like, hey, everything's got to be done on time. It's got to be correct.
Yeah. I know my director, he hates this word, but it's a lot of trackers. We have a lot of spreadsheets where we're keeping up with those students when consent was signed, when testing is back, because sometimes testing could be, 6 or 8 different tests. So sometimes making sure that everything is back because we also don't want to meet and then come back a week later and meet again. So we try to make sure we're getting all that stuff back in a timely fashion and meeting on the most data that we can within a given time to also stay within that timeline. Sometimes students may come to us already started that process, so we have to pick up the ball where it
Mm.
was left off. So various things can kind of throw off our timeline. But so we use a lot of trackers to keep up with all that information. And sometimes that's follow-up phone calls, that's certified letters, that's
Mm.
sometimes pulling students out of class, virtually here, popping into a meeting where they may be meeting on something else, say, hey, parent, remember we need to do this. So there's a
Mm.
lot of follow-up that happens too.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of follow-ups happening here. I can sense a nickname that we could come up with, but I can't come up with one for you on the spot here for following up. Martell, you are the instruction side of things. So Veronica's the compliance piece. So once things are correct and on time, and Veronica's done the tracking and everything, right? What are you doing to make sure, like, what does it take to make sure, like, these students are getting the support that they need and that they're supposed to get in their daily instruction?
So I will say, Veronica's team, as well as our case managers here, um, do a great job of drafting and creating IEPs and ensuring that those IEPs are essentially instructional roadmaps. That's how we view IEPs on the instructional side. They're roadmaps to ensure quality instruction for those students. So once those are drafted, we're making sure that we have specially designed instruction in our daily instruction. We're making sure that teachers are aware and trained of what's listed in those IEPs. So making sure that that student is, getting their accommodations. If they need extra time to finish an assessment or an assignment, making sure we're giving that extra time. If they need, to learn how to use graphic organizers to scaffold or break down some of that material. So um, it starts with the compliance side and it turns into an instructional roadmap that we kind of just pick up and just make sure that we're following everything in that roadmap to ensure quality instruction for our special education students. So
Mm. So it sounds like there's probably a lot of collaboration happening on these
almost definitely most
sides, and y'all are having to communicate, and you got to make sure you don't, get on Veronica's bad side or anything.
no no
Just
no
make your life harder for you, huh? Uh,
definitely not. I'll say this. Veronica and her team, they ensure access, and then me and my team, we ensure progress.
mm,
So they give us
Love that.
access, and then
mhm.
we try to make sure that our students progress. So it's definitely a team collaborative effort.
Man, that's a great way to think of it. Access and then progress. I love that. I'm gonna steal that, Martell.
T-shirt,
Thank you.
T-shirt idea.
Yeah,
No, I'm playing.
exactly. There it is. What do y'all think then other schools could learn from how GCA handles child find and special education systems? Because it sounds like I don't want to steal your answer, but like the collaboration piece that y'all have to do with your teams communicating with each other, that's probably huge, having this access and then this progress side of things. But what comes to mind when y'all think about like how GCA does special education at GCA? Like, what could other schools learn from us from GCA?
And if I could answer, I think the collaboration piece is the biggest part. People would assume maybe that we're virtual, that we don't collaborate as much as we do, but we actually probably collaborate more
Hmm.
than you would in a traditional brick and mortar setting. I know that in some other districts, sometimes there's one lone person who's handling special education. There may be people spread out across different schools. But because we're one school and one district, we have a lot of collaboration. If I have a question about something, I have a colleague I can reach out to right here, or I can pull someone into a situation to help me assess what's the best way to address it. And so just having that collaboration piece, I think, is what makes us stand out.
Hmm. Love that.
If I had to follow that one. Let's see. As I mentioned before, data must drive every decision. So that's one thing that I think other districts could learn. A lot of people do use data to drive decisions, but also sometimes emotion. I mean, we're all humans, so sometimes emotions and feelings get into the decision making. Um,
Mhm.
I would also say to build sustainable systems.
Mm.
I feel like we've done that over the last couple of years, and we've seen a lot of progress with building some of those systems um, as it relates to special education. And then lastly, I would say you got to be proactive instead of reactive.
Mm.
If you're reactive in special education, then that's when you get on Veronica's bad side. So that's when the lawyers and all of those due processes and all of those
Mm.
things come. So if you try
Mm.
to remain proactive, then we stay out of Veronica's office. So that's always a good thing.
Mm.
Yes. And one more thing I was going to add too, and I've heard this, like people love a GCA written IEP.
Nice.
We get a lot of compliments on, we know this is right because it came from GCA. And so that's
Mm.
kudos to our case managers and our staff who are drafting those IEPs. to the quality of the IEP and to the data that's being pulled and collected and how we are using that to inform the IEP and making sure that it is truly individualized for that student.
Mm. Man, that's awesome. A GCA IEP is
Yeah.
the standard. So that's cool. Well then, hey, that's what a big thing they can learn is making sure they have GCA level IEPs. When y'all
Definitely.
when y'all think about the way that students with disabilities are supported at GCA. Is there anything in particular that like stands out? Like is there something that we're doing or a way we're supporting in our virtual setting like you're like, you know what? That's something that really sticks out to me when I think about the way that GCA is supporting students with disabilities.
I'm gonna say we,
Um,
we truly are meeting students where they are. Like we literally are meeting them where they are. And for some folks, some of the more intense cases I've been around is for some of our students, this is their last real chance at real school because they may have health challenges or any other concerns. They may have been experiencing bullying or something at a previous school or whatever, and just giving them an opportunity to still have that school experience without some of the um, barriers they may have had to face.
Hmm. How do y'all balance? I know that you mentioned the reasonable time frame of once a student starts the process, but how do you balance, um, Veronica, the process of doing things correctly, but also like moving quickly enough because I imagine and you can tell us like once families start this process, do they get a little antsy? Or are they like, okay, come on, I need to know, I want to know, like, or do we have our services? Like, how do you kind of balance the process of making sure you're doing things right, doing them correctly, but then like doing them timely when you have like maybe some families breathing down your neck, like, hey, let's get this process taken care of. How do you balance that, Veronica?
I would say it starts with communication.
Mm.
Communication, telling parents up front, this is what you can expect. This is going to take 60 to 90 days to do, and just kind of setting that expectation up front for how long something's going to take. And then also just responding if parents have questions. There's a case manager they can speak to. They may even reach out to their FEL, to their student's teacher, but all the staff here take a part in making sure that when a parent or family has questions or concerns, that somebody's actually responding to them. But I think it starts with setting that clear expectation up front of what to expect. And then there's also protections that come with special education for, like if they disagree with our evaluation or our decision, or if they have additional concerns and things like that. So just letting them know their rights as well and having that up front, I think makes things go smoother.
yeah, I was just gonna add that our case managers, Veronica's team, they set realistic expectations and then they produce unrealistic results.
Mm.
So we'll say, hey, it might be 90 days, it might be 100 days, and then they may put something out in 45 days. So, and
Uh,
then like kind of what Veronica said, constant communication, like make sure that all stakeholders are aware of what's going on. So parents, teachers, Veronica's team, my team, whoever it may be, that's sitting at that table, just making sure everybody's aware of what's going on along in the process. But definitely realistic expectations and performing at unrealistic rates.
mm, I love that. That's so smart, under promise and over
Over
deliver
delivery.
Over
over
deliver.
here. So this may or may not get you fired up or not or what, but what would you say to a parent who or is just skeptical? It's like, you know what? Virtual school, they can't meet my child's needs. Virtual school, online school, they can't do it. It's not a place for special education. It's not able to be done. What would you say to somebody who's skeptical of that or a doubter of that or what have you? What would you say?
Do you want my real answer?
I know, right? I was about to say, don't knock it till you try it. No.
Right.
Um,
Well, there you go.
yeah, that probably would be my real answer.
Mhm.
I'll be honest, even before coming to work here, I was a little skeptical because I was like, how do we ensure that we're, providing specially designed instruction in a virtual setting? But um, GCA has some of the best creative minds that I've encountered, especially in the workplace. And once you put all of those people in a room together and just start thinking of different ways, to provide instruction to make sure that we're compliant, um, yeah, I would go back to saying you can't knock it until you try it because it is a phenomenal experience for our special education students. Unprecedented,
Mm,
phenomenal experience for our special education students.
mm,
V.
And I would add to that too. It's almost the same thing as what you get what you put into.
mm.
Like we can't do this work alone. So at the same time, we need your partnership as a parent. So don't knock it till you try, but also what are you willing to support with as well? Because it takes all of us to make this work.
Mm. That's so good. I love that. Make sure that you get out what you put in. That's such a
Yes.
wise thing to say. Leave us with this last question for y'all. What is the biggest lesson that you think you've learned? Or it doesn't have to be the biggest, just a lesson that comes to mind that you've learned about supporting students in special education, whether it's like specific to Child Find and IDEA or just in general to your role. What is the biggest that one of the lessons that you've taken away that about like the job that you do at GCA?
I can add generally because I'm on the end of conversations where parents are disgruntled. Um, Generally, they felt they've been wronged. Sometimes they come here already with a chip on their shoulder, for lack of a better phrase. And so having to smooth that out. And so the biggest lesson that I can take away is that parents just want to be heard. And so sometimes just being able to come from that lens of this is, remembering that even though this parent may be irate, sometimes they may take out their frustration on you, but remembering that they're doing the best that they can because no one asks to necessarily be a parent of a student with a disability. And it comes with a lot of challenges, even outside of academics. And so just having that compassion and remembering that they're advocating and they're using the tools that they know how to best advocate for their student. And so making sure that we continue to one, work on that relationship and building that trust. And so I approach every situation with, you tell me what's going on. I hear you're upset, you're frustrated about this. Want to make sure I'm really understanding what your concern is and then us coming up with a plan together to address that. I really value building relationships with our families, and that tends to be how we stay out of formal complaints and all that. We don't get a lot of that here.
Mm,
So a parent may come to us in one way, but they don't stay or leave that way. We
mm,
tend to be able to build that relationship with them, build that trust, and turn situations around to really positively impact the academic life of a student.
mm. That's awesome. Martell.
One thing I've personally learned um, from my instructional lens, I would say that special education is not about fixing deficits. It's about unlocking potential.
Mm,
That's probably my personal mantra. Um, yeah, we're not here to fix you. We're here to unlock what we know that you're capable of doing, and make sure that you're giving the best version of you. So we're here to assist you in making sure that you're giving the best person. I mean, the best version of you. So unlocking that potential.
mm. I love that. And that probably changes your perspective too on like how you view students and what they're capable of. That's such a
Mhm.
strong idea to leave us with. So here's today's big idea. When students are identified early and supported well, they get a stronger start that can shape everything that comes next. Thanks again to Veronica Williams and Martell Shavers for joining us and sharing how Child Find and IDEA help students get the support they need from the very beginning. If this episode gave you a clearer picture of how special education works in a virtual school, be sure to subscribe and explore more conversations on GCA Unmuted Voices of Virtual Education. Thanks again, Veronica and Martell.